All right, we are live. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I have the distinguished pleasure of welcoming AP Canavan, a critical dragon, to my channel for a chat. AP, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, Tori, thank you so much for inviting me because, authors, typically look at people who do editing and are like, "Oh, you're the enemy. Oh, we don't like you. You come in and you're mean to my words." So it's very nice to be welcomed here.
I love it. I am so grateful. I literally said this 30 seconds ago behind a screen. I'm so grateful for editors because, like I said, there's a reason that there are authors and there are editors, because us poor authors, I don't know where we would be without good editors.
One of the weird things, some authors are amazing editors of their own work. And yet I think that is people who can edit their own work. It is a stunning skill because you have to be able to step back from it. You have to be able to step back from what you meant to put on the page, because you know that, and actually see what's on the page. And it's so much easier to get someone else to do it for you because they don't have all of that knowledge in the back of in their head.
Right.
On the other hand, one of the great techniques that someone explained to me once was, if you're trying to edit your own work, don't read it in sequence, read it in reverse sequence, because then you're not immediately sort of leaping on to the next, that you're actually paying more attention as you go back through it. So sometimes just changing the way that you're approaching it can give you that change of perspective to edit your own work. But I find editing my own work difficult, but editing other people's work much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's, when you've stared at your own piece of work for so long, you're getting, you get very tunnel visioned oftentimes, because it's harder and harder sometimes to take a step back and have a more objective viewpoint of it. And I actually love the phase of writing where I've created my bit and then I start giving it to other people and seeing what they're noticing that I missed, because that's a relief to me. I find that a huge relief, because I'm like, oh, phew. So now when I put it out, somebody's already caught that was, because I might not have, probably wouldn't have actually.
That's having other people that you can trust, be it a professional editor, be it a writing group, be it friends or whatever. Having people you can trust who have a different perspective can be completely eye-opening about the things that you thought were obvious, and they go, "No, I did not see that at all." You're like, but I gave you that clue back in chapter 3 in that half line.
How did you not see that? Yeah.
Nope, missed that. But it gives you that different perspective, because of course, as an author, as soon as you've perfected your baby and sent it out into the world to fend for itself, you're not there to explain things. It has to stand on its own. So getting a variety of perspectives before you send it out defenseless into the wilds, into that dark forest surrounded by wolves.
The critics and the booktubers and the
So that getting those other perspectives so that you can maybe tweak little things or see, oh, maybe I need to shore that up or emphasize that a bit more. Or, actually looking at this now, I get where they're coming from. How they suggested to fix it. That's completely wrong. But this will work. This will do the thing that they need it to do. And it'll correct the problem. And that's quite often editors, well, at least in my experience, editors will isolate a problem and they'll say, this is what the problem is. They might give you a couple of different ways of approaching it to fix it. But almost certainly, the author is the person best placed to look at the problem, look at the potential solutions, because that gives them a better idea of what you mean by the problem, and then come up with the solution that fits more perfectly. And I think a good working relationship between an author and an editor is one of those brilliant, unheralded sort of partnerships, because editors are there not for the glory, not for it to get their name in anything. They are there to make the author and the author's work look good. That's all an editor does. And we do it by sitting in a dark room somewhere, sitting at a computer screen going, "Don't bother me. I just want to do this." Is what I do. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's such an important learned skill for authors too, because it is very easy to be overly sensitive about, putting it mildly, to be overly sensitive about somebody, editing or taking apart and figuring out things that might be wrong or like not explained or whatever it is in the book. And to me, that's one of the most important things to learn as an author, is that ability to hand it to someone else, take their commentary with, understanding that they are trying to help you. If you've chosen somebody you trust, which is step number one, and then discerning as the author whose voice is in the story, how do I take those comments and suggestions and make the story better than it was before?
Yeah.
And that's such a hard skill set to learn.
And the thing is, I think sometimes people who are maybe getting an editor for the first time don't realize an editor is not there to rewrite your work.
Right.
And an editor is not there to say, do this thing because it's better and it will please me. It's not about that. It's a good editor looks at your work, tries to understand your voice, your point, your story, and go, your story and your voice will be stronger if this thing was changed. Here's these things. There's also these things. Look at these different areas, these different issues. This is where I'm seeing a weakness in what you are doing.
Yeah.
Potential ways to fix it are, let's have a conversation. Now that I've highlighted this, we'll chat about it. We can bounce ideas off each other, and then you go and do the hard work, which is actually fix it.
Right.
The authors do the hard work. The editors just sit there going, oh yeah, misplaced a comma. Oh, bad author. That comma's in the wrong place.
Well, and I think sometimes as writers, we really need that creative jostle, because there does come a point in the process where we can't go any farther without somebody else's collaborative help. And I think that storytelling is a very collaborative art form, and I love that about it. And I feel so isolated in the part where I'm plunking out the first manuscript, and it almost feels liberating once I get past that and I'm able to expand to other people's thoughts about it as well. Hi, Catherine. Can be helpful to get samples from 2 to 3 editors to see who is the best fit for your book too.
And that is something I would encourage every author to do, be they shipping around a book to try and get it out there to find an agent or something like that, or if they're self-published, trying to find an editor who works with you and your style, because there are loads of brilliant editors out there and they'll give you brilliant insights. But if you don't work well together, it's not going to be an enjoyable process.
Right.
And it's the same. It's one of the reasons why I try to encourage people who are engaging me to do things. I go, we're going to have a chat first, because you need to know that you can work with me. I need to know that I can work with you. Because if I say, oh, there's a problem with this thing, and then the person, well, you just don't understand my work. You go, this is not going to work. Because we all have our different styles, authors and editors. We have our different styles. We have our different personalities. We have our different ways of going about things. And you want to find someone who can work with you. And if you can find that, if you can find the person who can work well with you, who can give you advice in the way that you can receive it and make use of it, that match made in heaven.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think that, if I were an editor and I ran across an author who had that response, my response, and this is probably coming from my author side too, would be that they're not ready for that step yet, because it's hard to, if they're not willing to see the flaws in the manuscript, it's going to be hard.
And again, it depends. Like, there can be cultural issues as well, because, how I address things, the types of comments I make, they might not be framed or phrased in a way that author is willing to accept.
Sure.
Whereas they need it phrased in a different way. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that.
Right.
Because you have to be honest in feedback. Like, that number one thing is you have to be honest. But that doesn't mean that you're blunt or crude.
Right.
Or,
right.
But sometimes my sense of humor about how I address things is going to read one way by one set of people, and other people go, that's actually quite funny, and that takes the sting out of the comment. Other people are going to go, no, that makes it worse. So again, finding an editor whose style works with what you want to do and who has the type of feedback that you need, that's invaluable. And it's sometimes about in writing circles, when you go to a writing group, and it's not the circle of trust, but where you hand in your story and then everyone gets a turn dissecting it, and you have to sit there silent. This sort of the gag rule.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of criticism of that in various circles for obvious reasons, because it can feel that you're being silenced and you're not being given control.
Mm-hmm.
But the positive aspect of that is, but that's what's going to happen once your story is out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way in a safe arena, which is a very private, it's just the writers group, for you to get used to what it's going to be like as soon as you step out there. So there are positives and negatives to it. And it's always about trying to balance the approach and make sure that a writer isn't made to feel vulnerable, and that the critique doesn't turn into something nasty. That's where the writing instructor should be stepping in to go, hang on a sec, no, you do not. That is not correct. That is not how we address fellow human beings, let alone fellow creatives.
Right.
So it's all about how it's managed. When it's managed badly, it is miserable for the people being critiqued. When it's managed well, it can be an invaluable learning tool. But again, it's all about how it's implemented. But
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Joanna wants to know, how was it working with your nemesis? Was that a match made in heaven?
The mind can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven, as Milton once said.
Philip is of the opinion that he was a perfect angel to work with.
Well, he was certainly working an angle. Philip reverses letters all the time. It's common. It was one of the things I had to fix.
Oh, Philip. He was the first comment, as we hadn't even gone live yet, and Philip was already here causing the nemesis tension in the chat.
And this is the thing, I keep trying to tell people, Philip Chase has this aura that he is a nice guy, that he's a wonderful guy. He's truly despicable and evil. Why can't other people see this? He's always there. He's an instigator. That's who he is.
We're here to get the word out today, AP. So that you have the floor. Hello, everybody. We've got some people in the chat hanging out with us. Who's unknown developmental editor? Are you referring to somebody specific here? Christopher. Hi, Brian. Esme, have a good night. Heidi says, what great advice to edit out of order that will work for writing legal briefs, too. I've never written a legal brief.
It works for non-fiction, fiction, memos. Like, the number of times that, because we're so used to reading in sequence, that you're basically skipping on and you're filling in words. But if you read backwards, you're not doing that. And so you force yourself to actually look at complete sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And does this sentence say the thing that it needs to say? Is there an object? Is there a subject? Is there a comma splice? Like you actually pick up on these things when you're not following the flow of the order of information.
Yeah. Matt wants to know, not a dumb question, when finding an editor, is it similar to a traditional contracting job where you can get bids, see samples, etc.?
Editors advertise all over the place. I can only speak for my process, but there are people who advertise on Twitter, people who advertise on Fiverr, people who are part of the Freelancers Association and are like advertise on job boards. The way that I usually do it, because with a lot of developmental editing and line editing for fantasy novels, which tend to be quite long, they're longer than your usual 70 to 110,000 words. Fantasy novels can be a lot longer. And because of that, it's an expensive job. It just is. So what I typically recommend to people to make sure that I'm a good match for them and they're a good match for me is they send me about 1,000-word sample from the start of their story, the prologue, the first chapter. So 1,000 words is roughly 4 pages. Industry standard, 250 words per page. So 1,000 words is 4 pages, and I will go through it for free. To get a sample of their writing, so I have a better idea of what they need. I do a brief, go over it, make some marks, make some comments, send it back. We set up a Zoom call to talk about it. And if, in the terms of the feedback and in terms of the call, the author is then happy and confident and can trust me to do the whole thing, then we go about scheduling me actually editing the entire novel. And that's, if someone comes up to you and says, this is a 180,000 word novel, that's a big project. That's 2.5 times the size of a standard literary novel at 70,000 words. So
yeah, they do get chunky over in this genre. Pablo says, in one interview, Adrian Tchaikovsky mentioned one of the reasons he took so long to publish was because he wasn't ready to get corrections and criticisms. Well, I mean, that's some self-awareness. I think that was a phase that I went through for sure. I had a really hard time for a while, that struggle of, no, this is perfect. What are you talking about? And moving past that and really embracing that collaborative process, I think was a huge step forward for me as a writer, and made everything a lot easier, to be honest.
But it can make you feel very vulnerable, because
it is, absolutely.
You put so much time and effort and passion into a project, and you put it out there, and then someone says, "Oh well, this is blah 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 blah," and you're like, you just don't get it, and you are initially defended. Everyone is.
Everyone is.
Like, when I was writing my PhD thesis, I had a friend look over a section. She was like, "You need to fix this paragraph," and I'm like, "But that paragraph is fine. There's nothing wrong with that paragraph." And she let me just vent for about 5 minutes. I went, "Are you done?" I'm like, "Yes." Look at the paragraph. I went, "Okay, fine. I'll fix it now."
One of my policies is, when I get a manuscript back with whatever phase of editing it's in, I skim through the notes, and then I leave it alone for about 2 or 3 days, and I allow myself to feel all the feelings, and there's for a few minutes, and then I come back to it, and I'm like, they have a point. But giving yourself that space to just have a little bit of vulnerability and recognize that, yes, your work is being critiqued, and that can be hard, is impressive. Yeah.
But it's, even to go back to what we were talking about, editing your own work, setting something aside for a couple of weeks or a month or even 6 months while you go and do something else, you focus on something else, then you come back to it, you'll have forgotten some of the things. And so when you start reading, you are that slightly fresher eye on it. And, that's one of the tricks that you can use as an author to edit your own work before you send it off to someone else to look at. And little things like that, it's phenomenal, the difference it can make. Just taking a bit of time first, instead of, I've finished writing, I'm now doing my editing pass, now this is done, now I'm going to send it away, and sort of turning it into a production line. Some people can do that, and it's a skill, it's a valuable skill, and it's brilliant. A lot of other people, no, take a bit of time, set it aside, write something else, write a short story.
Yes. I found that's the first time I had done that this year, because I did the Advent of Winter anthology that's coming out in December. I was in the middle of writing Bloodstones, and I was kind of hitting a bit of a rut with that. And I just started something completely new, 5,500 word limit. And I was amazed at how much that kind of jostled things around and kind of restarted those creative wheels. And I'm going to use that again in the future, because that was really helpful.
And
Chris says, I eagerly await constructive criticism on my manuscript. Rip me apart now. I say when I'm in the flexible stage to want to change things. AP, hope you are feeling better, from Paul.
I'm taking a lot of medication.
Hi, Derry. I wanted to ask a little bit about that. So As a developmental editor specifically, what are some of the pitfalls do you see authors falling into when it comes to specifically the developmental stage of writing?
One of the most common things, particularly from newer authors or debut authors, starting their story 3 chapters too early. You read the first 3 chapters and you go, right, cut all of those out. This is where your story starts. About 4 pieces of information there. It can be fitted in here, here, and here. You don't need any of that. And that's probably the most common one, thinking that you need a long introductory section, because we're all familiar with Freytag's pyramid: introduction, instigating event, rising, and they think I need to lay the groundwork for this, and I need to lay the groundwork, and it ends up being quite expository. It's a lot of things being explained, and there are ways to curtail that. There are ways to shorten it. There are ways to condense it. And quite often, one of the easiest things to do is just chop out. And quite often, it's like the first 3 chapters or at the first chapter. And that would be one that I would see coming up quite a lot. Possibly another one is forgetting about very basic things. So, to give you an example, if the sun's rising in the east and setting in the west, forgetting that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and therefore light is going to change over the course of the day. So it's, and he was facing looking this way. Then he's being blinded by the light. He's staring directly into the sun. He's not going to be able to see those people because the light's shining in his eyes. You've already.
But AP, didn't you just talk about the suspension of disbelief in your last one of your last videos?
And internal consistency is very important. And it's little things like that sometimes those little trivial, and they are trivial, and you suddenly realize, you go, actually that is something that can kick a reader out of their immersion. And just tweaking it a little tiny bit, having them stand in a slightly different position in the scene, you go, yeah. Another great one is a lot of authors will start a chapter. Here is my paragraph describing the scene. Second paragraph, here is the introduction of the character. Third paragraph, here is where the character now interacts with someone else. And you go, that's in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. Very how you start chapters. And again, it makes sense, because if you start a chapter mid-dialogue without establishing who the people are, it's just voices in a white void. Unless you have very distinct character voices and you've already established who those characters are, and therefore as soon as because this is midway through the novel, and so when the character or when the reader reads that dialogue, they know who the character is. Integrating description, action, and dialogue, moving between them to provide variety. That is one of the easy. Don't think of it in terms of, here's my description block, here's my action block, here's my dialogue block. That might be a good way to sort of draft it, but start thinking about a way to mix them together so that there's now variety of what's happening on the page, because we live in a day and age where most of us constantly need things to stimulate. We need change. We need new things. Vary stuff. It helps us. It helps maintain interest. So those are just very simple, straightforward things.
Yeah.
And almost everyone goes, oh yeah, because that's how Sanderson does it. That's how Abercrombie does it. That's how Erickson does it. That's how Hobb does it. That's how Wirtz does it. You go, yeah. The more you read of other people, start paying attention to how they open chapters. Take notes. Like, pick 5 random chapters from one of your favorite fantasy novels. Look at what happens in paragraph 1, what happens in paragraph 2, what happens in paragraph 3. Note down exposition, action, description, dialogue, internal monologue, the variety of it. Then note down sentence length. And whether sentence length changes according to the type of information that's being conveyed to the reader. Notice, do you have a lot of long sentences all together, or is it long sentence, short sentence, long sentence, short sentence? Is there variety? paying attention to those things. This is why quite often we say one of the best educations you can get as an author is go and read widely. If you want to write fantasy books, knowing the genre is great, but knowing the romance genre and the horror genre and classics and literary fiction, because all of those different genres will show you different ways to do things. Will show you, take Jane Austen. Austen could make a polite conversation over tea seem tense and dramatic. There didn't need to be swords drawn for it to be a tense scene. So how did she do that? Pick out that scene. Look at how she did that. Look at the language she uses. Look at how she varied sentence length. Look at how she used different character perspectives. Look at it, analyze it, break it down. Then go and look at anything else and do the same thing. See how people build tension, build atmosphere.
Yeah.
Well, you should read Wildly. Oscar Wilde.
Picture of Dorian Gray is actually on my bucket list of classics to read. I'd really like to read that one.
I love Picture of Dorian Gray.
Do you? My husband really enjoyed it too. I have not read it yet. I would like to.
Well, of course, like Wilde being Irish, of course I was going to read Wilde.
Well, yeah.
People always forget Wilde was Irish, Bram Stoker was Irish.
Just a lot of really good Irish authors.
But people often, when they talk about Stoker, refer to him as a British author because technically, historically, yes, where Dublin was part of the British Isles and part of Britain, and then they had to give it back. And it led to some tensions where I was born. Let's not get into that. But because he gets described as a British author, he gets conflated with an English author, which leads to forgetting that the Anglo-Irish experience, that is actually quite different to the English experience.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of complexity that can be brought up in Dracula because of where he was from and the sense of dual identities that you have and the different divided loyalties. And it's a wonderful, the Anglo-Irish or post-colonial reading of Dracula is amazingly compelling. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's another one I have not read yet. So I will probably send you a message and be like, all right, what should I be looking at?
We're no longer friends.
Sorry.
I'm going to be grumpy.
I'm doing my best, AP. I'm trying to read all the things.
And you know what? We can never read all the things. So the one piece of advice I give to me, don't try to read all the things. Try to find things that engage you, interest you, make you passionate, make you want to be better. Those things. Don't worry about, but this is the new book that people are talking about. So what? Right. Those, if they're having discussions and recording the videos, those videos are going to be around. Yeah. Get to it when you get to it. Look for things that inspire you because life is too short to be chasing the new thing. Try and find things that inspire you, that give you joy, that give you passion, because what you love is going to be individual to you. I could tell you, you should read Dracula. See, if you want to write horror and you want to understand vampires, you have to read Dracula, but you should also read Carmilla. And you know what? For the modern vampire, you should probably read some Anne Rice as well, because that was a change to what modern vampires were. And let me design an entire list to educate you on vampires. You don't need that. Find the things that inspire you, because if you are passionate about it and you're going to be creative, it doesn't matter if someone else has already had the idea. It's your version of that idea and your passion for it, your drive for it, how you tell that story. If you can capture people's imagination, it doesn't matter that, I've read 20 stories about vampires. Yeah, everyone has. That's not the point. It's create things that cause joy, or, I suppose if you're writing horror, cause fear and apprehension and anxiety and give people nightmares, which is why I don't read the genre anymore.
Horror is not my genre either. I can completely understand that. But I like that point of that's how fresh ideas and kind of twists on archetypes or things that are already known happen, is people bringing in new ideas to certain types of characters or storytelling. Derry had a question for you that I wanted to make sure I didn't forget. I'm curious if there's ever a story element that as an editor doesn't fit, but as a reader you'd love to see something done with the idea.
No. I kind of get the thing is, if as a reader I'm enjoying it, you go, right, so it does fit the story. It's causing the reader to want to read more. It's causing the reader to want to read on, because again, it's not about an author ever writing something to please me.
Mm-hmm.
Like people seem to have difficulty with this concept that I can read and edit a book that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you do that? Well, for years I taught novels that I didn't personally enjoy, but I can still find things in them that are brilliant, that are interesting, that are engaging. Like you don't have to. Reading for work and reading for pleasure are two different things. And yeah, it's fantastic if you're reading something that's hitting all of your buttons.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder to edit something that is hitting all of your buttons. Because if it is doing all of the things that you personally love, you kind of settle in. Well, I just got to read the next bit. I'll go back and make notes in a minute. And next thing you know, you're 5 chapters along and you go, I haven't made a note. It's like, oh, let me go back, because you get caught up in it. And that's, and that's the sign of a book that you love, that you don't notice how much more that you're reading. And you have to get into work mode when you're editing. You have to maintain that focus. But if something was sort of sticking out as it didn't fit the narrative, and you go, it's a really cool idea, it's something that this author should maybe take out, put over in a different manuscript, don't forget about it, it's a really cool idea, put it over there, close up that hole, sew it up, put a bow on it, make it look nice, move on with the rest of it, then go over to that thing that I told you to move, look at it, and create an entirely new thing out of that, because that is going to take you off in a new direction, and it'll be really wonderful. Like sometimes things like that come up, or other times you say, with this thing you're signaling you want to move this way, with this thing you're signaling you want to move this way. These are mutually exclusive directions. You need to decide which one you want to follow, which one is, because you're going to seesaw between the two. And it is very difficult to do that well. You have to be able to balance it. You have to be able to manage the different tones or the different themes. And if that's what the author wants to do, you go, right, let me help you do that. Or alternatively, take that thing out, focus on this thing, and develop that into a more cohesive, singular vision. And it's all about trying to find that author's voice, that author's story, what that author is trying to do, helping that author do that. It's not about, well, this is just bad. You're like, what does that even mean? People use this. Right. Is that a good book? You're like, for what? A good book to read? Well, for who? For me? Well, I don't know. I'm not you. Is it entertaining? It depends. What entertains you? How old are you? What are your interests? What else have you read? Is this good prose? Well, who's the intended audience? Is it for 6-year-olds? Is it for 10-year-olds? Is it for 15-year-olds? Is it for 30-year-olds? Who's it for? Because the type of writing is going to change according to audience.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things why, as a booktuber and reviewer, when people ask me to recommend a book, I can't just do that. I can't ever just say, oh, you should go read X. I'm like, okay, tell me what you've already read. Tell me what you've already enjoyed. Tell me what are you looking for? Are you looking to stay in the same vein of things you love? Are you looking to be challenged a little bit or try something new? Like, there's so many caveats to that. It's not just go read X book.
But the other thing about that is we usually are really bad about knowing what we like. So, like, someone could say, oh, I really like The Black Company. Well, what about it did you like? Oh, I just thought it was really cool. Anyway, right. Did you like the distinctive voice that Croker had as narrator? What do you mean? Right. It's written in a really distinctive authorial voice. Well, no, I was thinking more about like the cool fights and stuff. You know, okay, so the action stuff. And you think, well, have you read any Vietnam fiction? Because it mightn't necessarily be fantasy fiction that
Just read it. Just read it.
Fantastic book. We need to talk about that in a second. But sometimes when people really love The Black Company, you go, it's not fantasy that you love, but it's that kind of terse sort of military writing that you like. Right. In which case, a lot of the military fiction written by veterans, that's going to be the thing that you're actually going to fall in love with, not fantasy stuff. Because, you know, people say, oh, you know, The Black Company inspired Stephen Erickson and Ian C. Asimov with Malazan. And you go, yeah, but those two series, in a lot of respects, are wildly different. Right. Yes, you can see elements that they have taken from Cook's writing and elements that they've taken from elsewhere and made their own. But you wouldn't say if you like The Black Company, you will like Malazan. You would say, if you like The Black Company, you might like Malazan.
Yep. Depends on what you liked about Black Company. Yeah, for sure. Daniel, well, I found there wasn't any gritty violence in the lighthearted YA romance I read. It's only natural. I should say it's bad.
Exactly. I remember, like, I am not a huge fan of Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. I don't think it is a particularly good book.
That shocks me.
Let's face it. I'm not the intended audience for it, now am I? And I will defend it in terms of romance, because when you start dissecting it, you go, yeah, it's hitting all of the romance tropes. It is a by the numbers, quite bland romance novel. It's not a particularly good one, but it's not a bad one. It's doing all of those things. But if you went into it going, I'm really interested in supernatural vampire fiction, you're like, this is not the book for you.
Nope.
If you went into it thinking, oh, I'm really into horror. Nope. I'm into urban fantasy, paranormal. Nope. Go into it thinking it's romance, quite chaste for a YA audience. Yeah, that's going to be your bag.
Yeah.
Knowing the audience, knowing the type, and that's when people say, oh, you know, I have these objective criteria. And I'm like, and how did you derive your objective criteria? From a list of subjective things that you have organized into a set of priorities. That's fine. But at the same time, it's not that, well, everything's just subjective. And, well, everyone has an opinion. Harlan Ellison said, admittedly quite bluntly, you're not entitled to an opinion. You are entitled to an informed opinion. So it's not that experts and critics and all these people are always going to be right. But statistically speaking, with the given set of criteria, agreed criteria or shared criteria they have, they're more likely going to have an accurate depiction of something. It doesn't mean anything in terms of what you are going to enjoy personally. And that's the thing. We all will have a reaction to something. It's trying to learn the difference between I don't like this and this is bad. You have kids. I am assuming at some point
you can probably hear them in the background.
At some point in time, they've gone, I don't like that's horrible. That's disgusting. That's bad. When what they mean is, I don't enjoy that.
Right.
And the thing is, we accept this in so many different things. But when it comes to reading, for some reason, it's, oh, no, but everyone is entitled to their opinion on it. And you're like, yeah, but opinion is, I didn't enjoy this. That's the thing that you can say that no one can ever gainsay. But if you say this is bad because the author didn't do this thing, and you know someone looks at it and goes, why would the author do that thing? That makes no sense. It didn't meet your personal expectations or preferences, and you're perfectly entitled then to say I didn't enjoy. No one can gainsay that. But to turn that into a judgment, you go assessment, evaluation, arrives at judgment. You didn't do the assessment and evaluation bit. What you went was, I didn't enjoy, therefore bad. And you skip over the whole process of actually understanding. And again, we're really bad at understanding the things that actually we like. We'll say, I really like this style. Do you? Really? That style? That's the thing that you like. Here's 30 different books from different genres that all use that style. So you say that you really like that style. Here you go. Read those. Do you like all of those books?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. Or maybe so. It all depends.
So how do we know what we actually like?
Introspection, self-reflection, thought. The things that we remember. Are we remembering content? Are we remembering plot details? Is that the thing that's motivating us? Because people like to claim, oh, I'm a character reader. And one of the reasons why people say I'm a character reader is they think it sounds more sophisticated than I'm reading for the story.
Sure.
I don't know why. There are plenty of books that I love because of the story. There are other books I love because of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're really into, say, I'm a character reader, I'm always about characters, then you go, there's a whole lot of literary fiction where nothing happens. It's all about the character. Like, oh no, well, that just sounds boring. You're like, then maybe it's you like interesting characters doing interesting things. And that's fine. We all have likes and preferences. There's nothing wrong with having likes and preferences and desires and things that you don't like.
Yeah.
But it's when we confuse our preferences for evaluative criteria. And that's the only thing that occasionally rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah. Joanna had a really lovely question up here I wanted to not forget. What inspires you right now?
My wife.
Oh.
She's amazing. The reason I moved to America.
So is she also a reader?
Yeah, and an academic, and she teaches at university.
Very cool.
One of the things that just to be slightly mawkish for a moment, one of the things I love about my wife is incredibly smart and puts me to shame. She sees things in books and in narrative, and I'm like, how did you see that? She stuns me with how brilliant she is. And it is a constant humbling reminder every day that I am not as smart as I would like to be. But what I love is she sees different things.
Right.
And so between us, we can have these really engaged conversations about books. And a book that she loves, I might absolutely hate. A book that she hates, I might absolutely, it's sometimes we like the same thing, sometimes we dislike. We have different likes and preferences. But no matter what it is, we can have really engaging discussions about it.
Yeah.
When I say raging arguments, academic arguments, it's
Sure.
not like we're hurling shoes at each other. Sandal in the face, you wench. It's nothing like that. But how can you say that? That isn't a post-colonial representation of that. That's clearly just colonial representation. Well, no, that's a patriarchal bias that's coming into ridiculous discussion.
Yeah.
But it is so much fun. And she has such insight because she thinks about the books in a different way. She approaches them in a different way. And that's one of the brilliant things about reading. It's one of the things that brought us together is, we met because we had similar areas of study, similar focus in research. But we hit it off because we weren't the same. We argued, we discussed, we had different positions. She can overlook my flaws, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, but that's such a beautiful gift because my husband and I are both literature people, and we actually in high school we were in the same friend group, but the way that we really started getting deeper into our relationship is we started talking about how to write a scene that he was working on in the book he was working on. And of course, all of our friends who are not bookish people were just like, what are you talking about? And I went over and sat by him and was like, okay, so I need a little bit more information, but what if you, And it's such a gift when you're able to share that passion for something and have those really deep conversations. That's one of my favorite things that Ben and I do for date nights is we'll talk about books, and it's pretty wild, but but it's
Oh
fun.
yeah, we're painting the town red. Well, actually, it's the book painting the town red, and we're going to sit here quietly and discuss it.
Right.
But you see, to other people, they might go, "Well, that sounds really boring." And you're like, "No," and this is
so
the thing.
Fun.
We all have our own passions. We all have these things that we love. Individually, we have these things, and if you can find someone who shares that, it's the greatest feeling in the world.
Absolutely, it's really beautiful. Laura says, "I too moved to America for a spouse. It's a big deal, and I commend you." Mrs. AP, clearly also amazing. A lot of hearts. I was just thinking this, Paul. I was like, I would love to see a discussion about a book on AP's channel with Mr. and Mrs. AP Canavan. That would be fun.
It is certainly not Mr. and Mrs. AP Canavan. She is her own person, and I would put my foot down about that. But I have to respect her to say she doesn't want to do it.
That's fair.
And you go, yeah. So I'm not going to make her do it. And I have to respect that because it is fun. And sometimes I steal her ideas shamelessly, just rip them off.
Yeah, I know there's quite a few people that have spouses that are readers that's just, they don't, that's not interesting to them to come on YouTube or.
Well, I would have to ask Christopher, was it debating the slog and whether or not it was a slog?
So going back to, I haven't even paid any attention to my list of questions. We've already been going for almost an hour and I haven't even needed it. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I do want to get into Malazan a little bit because it wouldn't be a conversation between me and you if we didn't at least talk about it once. But what drew you in the beginning to literary criticism and editing, and just what drew you into that?
Well, I have always been a passionate reader. I have always loved reading. My mother has embarrassing photographs of me as a very, very small child reading. And I've always read. I've always loved it. I've always loved stories. And the more that I read, and with kids, like if you're 8 years old, here's the short stories for 8-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And you had all of those books. And the thing was, I was getting through those, and then through the ones for 9-year-olds, and then the ones for 10-year-olds, and was starting then. As I got older, I was reading my elder brother's books when I was far too young to be reading those books, but I read them all the same. I loved stories, and when in high school, in English class, because we studied English language and English literature as two separate subjects, and in English literature, when we started doing analysis of the use of similes, the use of metaphors, deconstructing poetry, I'm like, this stuff gets even better. And that was the first moment, realizing how it wasn't just the story. It was how the story was told. How authors mess with you, how they manipulate you, how they poke you in certain directions, how they hide things in plain sight. And reading Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, Johnny Wirtz, Raymond E. Feist, David Gemmell, David Eddings, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, R.A. Salvatore. You start reading Frank Herbert, Brian Herbert. I read a bunch of horror books. That was the mistake I made. I read a bunch of horror books far too young. It turned me off the genre entirely.
For life.
Suddenly realized it wasn't just stories for kids, that there were stories for everyone, and there were all these different types of stories. And then you started noticing commonalities. You started noticing these tricks. that an author in one genre was using, but this other author used in a different genre for a different effect.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating. And then, of course, I went to university and I was told, go and do a real degree to get a real job because no one's interested in me. So I did law.
Sure.
And that was a mistake. But eventually, I went back and I studied English literature. And it's my passion. It's the thing that I love, the thing that I can fall into and lose hours to. And, even like one of my favorite things, and it's one of the earliest skills that you learn, is close reading. How to close read. I still love it. I still love seeing, just with a short section of writing, what an author is doing, how they evoke things, because every author is different and every book is different. And sometimes, when you're in literary academia, you kind of move on and it's much more about theory and more focused on these things. But ultimately, I keep coming back to analysis. I keep coming back to those things. And I like narratology. I like other forms of structuralism and formalism. I enjoy all of that stuff. But I love close reading so much that you go, well, I'm not going to eschew close reading for structuralism and narratology entirely. I like both. So I use, and that ultimately is a great combination for developmental and line editing. That close reading and a good knowledge of narratology and structuralism. Who knew it was actually a professional skill that you could market and use?
Clearly not the people who told you to get a real degree.
You can parents want their children to have practical things that will make sure that they aren't destitute. And I will read your book. A little sign written on cardboard. I will read your book for a sandwich.
Yeah. I know it was funny because when I was younger and going into college, I kind of moved around a little bit before I landed finally on English, and that was again me coming back to my passion point. And somebody in my family said, "Well, what a pipe dream," And now I'm like, I'm doing as well with this and have had better opportunities because I'm passionate about this area of life than I would have had in something that I hated, so it works out in the end.
But when I was studying law, one of the things that I really loved, well, first of all, a lot of the skills, the techniques and things that you learn in a law degree, they are equally applicable in English.
Sure, that makes sense.
But one of the things I loved about law were the stories behind the cases. And the thing is, I was meant to be reading and understanding the judgments, and I was far more fascinated by the narrative that was created. How did this circumstance arise? Let's have a look at it. You go, focus on the thing that you're meant to be doing. So I was constantly distracted in law because I was interested in the story.
Yeah.
So that should have been a big flashing sign.
Neon this way.
It's like in the Man with Two Brains. I just need a sign, and it's like everything shakes. But I ended up where I ended up, and I was shaped by those experiences. And training in law and working in various legal aspects and doing that refines a bunch of techniques that you bring to the table as well. Like you build on all of these different skills from the different areas of your life, and you never know when one skill from one area is going to be useful in a different area. We are all a fascinating melange of experiences.
Absolutely. So I was wondering, when you were mentioning that, for anybody who is watching this and doesn't know what close reading is, do you have a brief description of what that is essentially?
Well, close usually when we read, we surface read. We read what the words are, what the words mean, and we move on to the next one. Close reading is taking a section and then paying very close attention to what each word, each sentence, each clause, each paragraph, looking for elements of imagery, word choice, structure, length, a type of sentences, syncopation, or the stress and unstressed syllables, and you start treating it almost like you're trying to decode a secret message. So I'll give you a very easy example. It's a 6-word example, and then the counter example is, I think, 5 words. So before flash fiction was a thing, Hemingway came up with the original sort of flash fiction thing that people talk about, which is for sale, baby shoes, never worn. Right? Every writer knows this. And it's attributed to Hemingway, even though, was it really Hemingway? There's some doubt over this. But for sale, baby shoes, never worn. And from that, we can talk about Hemingway's iceberg storytelling, about the implications, about how the reader imagines and feels the emotion tied into this, because it's tied up in that phrase, never worn. That's the thing that gives it impact. How do we know that? Because let's rephrase it. For sale, new baby shoes. Factually, exactly the same sentence. Factually, exactly the same. Emotionally, for sale, baby shoes, never worn. That's the tragedy. That's the story. That's the implied narrative. All because new has been rephrased as never worn. And the implications implicit in that. What does that imply? What does it mean? What are we getting from it? So close reading is the ability, the approach of looking at things to try and work out why they function the way they do. You're picking apart what's on the page. So like you see this all the time in writing, where tension is building up and it's going to end in an explosive action scene. How is the author doing that? And you'll notice maybe sentence length getting shorter and shorter and shorter as you get to the fight breaking out. That it's ramping up. You might notice that start putting in more violent language of where there are different synonyms, but one of them has a violent connotation, or one of them has a battle connotation, or something that they start getting slipped in. And so, yeah, they technically mean the same thing, but it's starting to sow the seeds in the back of your head unconsciously. Violence is brewing. Little techniques like that, starting to use shorter words, sharper words, words with harsher consonants, because short, sharp Anglo-Saxon words with those hard consonants in them will suddenly make you think of things breaking and cracking and all those sorts of things. And you can pick all of that apart and you see how it's done. And the more practiced authors get, the more they do this automatically, that they reach for it. They go, what's the word I'm thinking of here? And they reach for it automatically. It becomes part of the process.
Right.
When sometimes you look at a passage and you say, why isn't this working? That's when you break this out and you go through it and go, right, if I'm building towards violence, am I seeding it with violent imagery or violent words? Am I shortening sentences? Am I doing those things? Am I using more of those harsher consonants? When you have something that you want to soften, you might become slightly more lyrical in how you say something. You might use slightly longer words to give that pause, that breath. That's what close reading is. It's just attention to the words on the page. And the more you practice it, the more you do it automatically. And I'm just sitting reading, and it's almost like in the back of your head, there's a little person going, oh, yep, tick, tick, done that, yep. And, people say this sometimes about, you had mentioned Malazan, and they went, oh, well, if you have to spend 45 minutes explaining this thing, then clearly it's not well written. And they never seem to realize the reason I can spend 45 minutes explaining this thing is because I got all the information from the text. Like, the information is there. But explaining how it's done to someone who can't see it, that's what takes time.
Right.
But this is what I understood when I read it. And it's not there. Well, how did I come up with all of this stuff then? Why is it in my brain? It's because it was transmitted to me. How was it transmitted to me? That's the thing that takes time to explain. Because otherwise I could just go, look, read that bit. That explains it. Not exactly an engaging video.
Well, I
Because
think that was kind of what I found this year when I went back and reread Gardens after 10 years away from it. And I had just started reading epic fantasy when I read it the first time, and I was very confused by a lot of it. And I wasn't, I was, could see that it was, I really enjoyed it, and I kept going despite having that confusion. And 10 years later, I had forgotten so much of the story. I remembered the feelings that I had when I was reading it. I remembered certain characters, but overall, I was coming to it with as fresh of eyes as I could. And to me, it wasn't the fact that I was rereading it. It was the fact that I had way more experience now reading and dissecting and immersing into fantasy worlds, that all of a sudden it was like this kind of haze had come off when I read it the second time. And I was like, this isn't confusing. I get it. I probably don't get it still, but I get it more than I did 10 years ago. So that was a cool experience to see that shift in my reading over those 10 years and how it changed my reading of the book itself.
and I think like that is a perfect point, and it illustrates so much, because when you were 12 years old, you were reading certain books and you got something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you reread that book now, do you think you would, and it was your favorite book when you were 12, do you think that maybe it would still be your favorite book? Or maybe potentially it's not going to work for you anymore because your tastes have changed, your level of literacy has changed, your life experience has changed. You value different things in your life now. That's one of the key things. When we look back often on books that we loved when we were younger, sometimes we look at them and you go, that has not aged well. Because times have changed, cultures have changed, our perception of what is now, we realize was a problem at the time, but we didn't see, but now we see. You go, I can see it now, see it in this book. Other times we look back on it and go, God, this is mind-numbingly dumb. How stupid. But literacy is a journey. It does not stop. We constantly evolve. And if we read widely, if we read different types of books, if we challenge ourselves, we can constantly improve. Not everyone has to do that. We can choose to go, no, I'm happy where I am. And I want to read airport books. I want to just be entertained. I don't want to be challenged. I don't want to have to work at it. And that's absolutely fine. But if that is your choice, then you don't get to say, well, that author should have done that thing. You go, no, you've made the choice that this is where you want to be. This is the type of book that you want to read. You don't get to say to other readers, you're not allowed to have the types of books that you want to read. Literacy continues to evolve. And one of the issues that we have so many different competing aspects of our lives now that it's taking time away. And there's this focus on make it shorter, make it easier, use simpler words. And it's not just transparent prose, which is about the language being used. It's actually make sentences simpler, reduce the reading age necessary to access this work because the level of literacy has dropped out. That's not something society wants to encourage, because it can sustain it for a while and then ultimately it will collapse, because there's only so far you can drop it down before it becomes a problem. We have to have diverse books, reading for all ages, all cultures, all interests. We have to foster that. And unfortunately, the publishing industry, because of the hyper commercialization of the publishing industry, the shrinking number of big publishers, so there's a limited number of traditional publishing outlets, which means they're focused on very particular commercial works. So self-publishing has to fill that void, and self-publishing has been flourishing because of that. It's providing that range of voices. But one of the big difficulties about self-publishing is, how do you find your reader?
Right.
How do you get this book would be perfect for these people, but how do I get it to them? And
Right.
that is something we're still working through. Like the publishing industry is shifting and changing with the integration of self-publishing. Used to be, people would go, oh, vanity press, and
Mm-hmm.
it was dismissive. People
Yeah.
don't have that regard anymore because it is a viable and respected option, because it
Yep.
has to be. It's the lifeblood of doing this. And that's not to say that people in traditional publishing houses, you have dedicated people there who are trying to find these things.
Yeah.
But when you're owned by a financial group that's in it for the investment, there are certain rules and strictures that you're constantly having to work around. And so
Right.
publishing is a very strange industry at the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
it will continue to evolve. And I think what we have to do is foster and encourage all different types of reading, all different types of approaches and books that appeal to low levels of literacy, books that appeal to middle ranges of literacy, books that appeal to only like Stephen Hawking level intellect that I wish I had, like that I can't read, that I go, oh, I've got to work until I can. We need that, because that's the lifeblood of diversity. That's the lifeblood of generating new ideas and new approaches and new ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Philip says, I take it as an excellent sign when a series can support hours and hours of analysis. People could write dissertations on Malazan. Some people have, I'm sure. It's funny. Yeah, I'm sure they have. Not a dissertation, but when I got my BA degree, my capstone presentation was about emotive characters in epic fantasy, and I used Erikson as my basis for that entire presentation, because I had just read Dead House Gates, and it's to this day one of the most impactful fantasy books I've ever read. And there was so much, and I got so excited about it. It was so much fun to really dig into the characters and a specific story arc for that, and just talk about how incredibly powerful these characters can be to draw this kind of level of emotion out of the reader, and doing that through the vehicle of fantasy is just where my passion points all kind of intersect. So,
and, I think that's one of the wonderful things about fantasy, about science fiction, the creation of these other places that are not here, that are one step removed or two steps removed from here, and we can place difficult things there.
Yep.
We can explore those difficult things, and it's not necessary to fix the difficult thing. It's not necessarily to come up with the solution for the difficult, but it's a way to explore it, to give us a handle on it. Yeah. And sometimes it's to play out that difficult thing so that we have catharsis seeing someone else experience it. Sometimes it's to provide encouragement that you can get through it. Sometimes it's to raise awareness that this is a difficult thing, even if we can't see it in the world around us. It is happening. And maybe we need to open up our eyes to it. There are all these different things, but by placing it just that one step removed, that two-step removed, it gives us distance. It gives us some protection. Right. And that can allow us to delve into some of the darker aspects of the human condition, some of the more difficult subjects that really are quite painful to examine, and to do it in a way that we don't have knee-jerk reactions, or that we don't feel the need to go, well, I know what the correct response to this is, so therefore I will. It's actually engage with it. See what it is. Try to think from that point of view. Try to immerse yourself in that. Try to understand it and be empathetic. And then take that back into the real world. It doesn't always work in every single circumstance. Some people try and fail. Some people try and succeed for some readers, but fail for other readers. The point is to try to do these things. And it's not going to work for no book works for every single reader. No depiction works for every single reader. There will always be people say, oh, that's badly done. There will always be people say, that was so incredibly well done. I saw myself in it. Yeah. You will have that range. because again, all readers are different. And that's one of the things that attracts me to fantasy and to science fiction, because my MA was in science fiction. But it is that way to explore and to create that psychic safety barrier to sometimes delve into really difficult things. And in other instances, this is I'm here for fun. I am getting away from the real. I do not have one more iota of energy to spend in the real. I am going to go on holiday, and I'm going to sit on the back of this dragon as it flies through the air and roasts some orc, because that is what I need right now, because one more gram of reality is going to break me.
And seeing both of those reading experiences as equally valuable, I think, is something that's really important too, because sometimes we really need to delve into those heavier themes and explore ourselves and the world around us. And sometimes we need to just sit on the back of a dragon and and neither of those things are more or lesser than the other.
And Gary makes a great point there. Sir Terry Pratchett's Discworld, that entire series runs the gamut of all of these different things. Sometimes in the same book, it's dealing with all of these things. Sometimes in the same paragraph. Like Pratchett, Sir Terry Pratchett was brilliant. And I was a huge Pratchett fan from a very early age. An incredible author. And, you know, particularly with his later books, you could see how angry he was getting. Like, the anger underlying his writing is palpable. Like that, the biting, sharp, cutting satire of some of those things, where he is eviscerating the particular topic at hand. That you go, that is only coming from someone who has gone, I have had enough. This will not stand.
Let me write about it in my
He did it in such a way that he made it funny. He made it he took a bitter pill, and like Mary Poppins, spoonful of sugar helped the medicine go down. He found a way to communicate to so many different people. And I love his writing for that.
Yeah. I'm hoping that I'm planning rather for a book club that I'm in. We're doing Guards in December, January. So I'm looking forward to getting my first taste of the Discworld with that. I was curious, dipping into Malazan a little bit, and honestly, we could talk about this for hours probably. But what do you think that Malazan as a series brings to the fantasy genre?
It's weird, because there are a load of aspects of Malazan that if you pick any single one of them, we can pick another fantasy series that does it. I can tell you what drew me to it. And apart from meeting Erickson and then being very, very embarrassed by that first meeting.
So when did you start? I don't know that I have, because I don't even know for sure like where in the series you started reading.
Hold the Hounds. It had already come back from his other advanced readers, and it was Hold the Hounds was when he had sent me some of the stuff from Hold the Hounds, and that's how we struck up the sort of chatting about things. But do you want to hear the embarrassing story about how I met Eric?
I would love to, honestly.
And I warn you, it's an embarrassing story. People will make fun of me. People do make fun of me for this. So I was a very young academic. I had just started out on my PhD. I had gone to a conference in Florida. And because transatlantic flight, making sure, blah, 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 I got there a couple of days early. And the president of the conference knew that I'd arrived in and said, listen, you're a big fan of Stephen Donaldson and epic fantasy. We're going for lunch with Donaldson tomorrow. Would you like to meet us and go with lunch? Go for lunch with us. I'm like, Stephen Donaldson, like Lord Thomas. Little short circuit in AP's brain. But I mean, that'd be amazing. Now, this was before AP had a smartphone. This was before smartphones were de jour.
Mm-hmm.
Only very rich people had a smartphone. This is before you could just, Stephen Donaldson, what does he look like? And so I came down to the hotel lobby. There's a bunch of people standing there. And this is Steve, Stephen, Steve, blah, 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 and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
So I start walking, and I'm walking next to Steven Erickson, who's been introduced as Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking I'm meeting Stephen Donaldson. And I had not memorized a picture of Stephen Donaldson. So we're walking along, and I go, I'm a big fan of your books, and it that maturity to fantasy is so necessary, and the balancing of darkness but with hope. And of course, like Eric's going, oh, well, this is great. I'm talking to someone who's read my books.
Yeah.
Because I'm talking about the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. Erickson is hearing comments about the Malazan books.
Sure.
So we sit at lunch, and of course, we were sitting chatting away. And then I realize that's not Stephen Donaldson. That's Stephen Donaldson, because someone said, Donaldson! And he went, yes.
And you're like, oh no.
So thankfully, my comments had been generic enough and applicable enough to Malazan that Stephen Erickson did not know at that stage
you had no idea.
I had no idea who he was, that I hadn't read a single one of his books. But we got to chatting, and then we walked back from the restaurant, we chatted on the way back, and then over the course of the conversation, we bumped into each other, we chatted, and then I came clean and explained the whole thing. And of course, Erickson immediately burst out laughing, because he's a very sympathetic individual. He immediately burst out laughing and went, I have to go and tell Donaldson this.
Of course.
Because he's friends with Donaldson. So he immediately goes off and tells Donaldson. And then said, would you actually like to meet Stephen Donaldson? Yeah. So I went, he introduced me to Stephen Donaldson. I got to chat to Stephen Donaldson. And yes, this is the embarrassing story about how I met Stephen Donaldson twice. One of the times he was Stephen Erickson. So anyway.
Well, so with that second meeting, had it taken some of the nerves out, because you've already met him once,
Well, when you're in this stage where you are already at the lowest possible ebb of, where do you hear this idiot thought that I was you? Very good mind. Donaldson's huge compared to Erickson. Like they look nothing alike. So Erickson then happened to have a couple of his Buckley and Corbel Brooch novellas with him.
Okay.
And he gave me some copies, a copy of the first couple, and said, I just happen to have these. I'm like, oh, thank you very much. This is great, because we'd struck up a bit of a friendship chatting during the conference. So on the way home, I was reading them, and I went, why? What? These are darkly comedic horror. What has this got to do with the epic? What? And when I got home, I then, oh, Gardens of the none of these are called Gardens of the. So I went out and got Gardens of the Moon. And that's when I went, oh, right, okay.
Starting to connect some pieces now.
And that was the beginning of it. Erickson and I ended up meeting up at this conference every year. Started hanging out, chatting, sending emails backwards and forwards, and then eventually he had invited me down for the weekend because he was living down in Cornwall and I was up in Liverpool. And so I drove down. I later found out that his wife, who is wonderfully tolerant of me, but his wife at the time had said, did you invite one of those weirdos? What if I don't like him? And Claire is absolutely wonderful. She is brilliant, and she's an artist, and she's really interesting, and it was fantastic. But that was how Erickson and I sort of got to know each other, and it was when he was writing Till the Hounds. He'd finished writing Till the Hounds, and he sent me a couple of things to see what I thought of them, and I'd sent him feedback. And it was from that point on then that he was. We had regular conversations. He would send me stuff. I would give him feedback. I became one of his advanced readers because I had a different way of looking at his books than the other people because he has other advanced readers.
Right. Yeah.
People he trusts, people who have different perspectives on the books, have different experiences, and that's feedback an author wants. So that's how that started.
Clearly it was meant to be, because you were supposed to meet Steven Erikson.
It's such an embarrassing story.
We all have those moments, though. I mean, everybody has. I felt like I'm typically pretty good about. I don't get starstruck very easily. I have people that I look up to as role models and things, but I'm typically pretty good about that. And that was one of the only moments on my channel so far where I struggled, was when I had the chat with Erikson back in April. And the idea, because 10 years ago, I remember telling my husband after reading Dead House Gates through House of Chains, someday I'm going to go to a convention and I'm going to get to have Erikson sign one of my books, and I'm going to get to kind of wave at him from afar kind of thing. And then the ability that we have now, that's amazing, to connect with people all over the world online in the live streams and stuff. I wanted to go back to that 21, 22-year-old Tori and just say, you have no idea what's going to be happening in 10 years from now. It was wild.
And one of the things I love about this academic conference in Florida, ICFA. Sorry, it's not a convention. So it's an academic conference. It's a bunch of people sitting around talking very seriously and deeply about science fiction, fantasy, horror, film, television. Really interesting conversations. But also a lot of authors go. A lot of authors attend. And they bring this brand new dimension to it. Because academics, we can get very locked into a sort of way of looking at literature. And academics, I think, need to be balanced by authors coming around going, that's not what look at your government. And getting to meet authors, hearing their perspective. Like Johnny Wirtz is absolutely phenomenal. She is brilliant, insightful. Her writing is fantastic, so intelligent and beautifully crafted. Is it a style that everyone is going to enjoy? No style everyone enjoys.
Right.
But it is a style that, because I'm reading her Wars of Light and Shadow at the minute, and it's a style that sings to me. It is so wonderfully evocative, and you can randomly pick paragraphs out of her writing, put them up on screen, and go, let's take this apart. And when you're looking, you start noticing all of these incredibly clever things that she does. And the thing is, you don't have to do that. You can just read through it, and because of how well done it is, there's information just gets dumped in the back of your brain that you don't know how she did that until you pause, go back, and go, how did I know that? And she's sneaky. Johnny Wirtz is sneaky. In fact, all the best authors, I think, are sneaky. You can't trust them. They're all professional liars. But that type of writing, and it's probably my favorite type of writing, is seeing clever writing.
Yeah.
And that can be done in so many different ways. Like the Hemingway example. That using very simple language, using very basic vocabulary, but creating something amazing from it, because Hemingway knew what he was doing. It wasn't just about, I'm using the first word that comes to mind plopped down on the page and describe the thing. He was careful. He crafted. Ursula Le Guin and her imagination and how she used words to bring us quite complex concepts, but in a way that we could understand them. Lee Brackett, like one of the unsung heroes that made SF and Empire Strikes Back. Lee Brackett, she's brilliant. These fantasy authors who with simple words on a page, transport us to completely different worlds, give us new ways to see our world, give us these new experiences, make us think and feel things that we didn't think were possible. And they do it in a way that enthralls us. And that is the power of literature. And I just happen to love fantasy perhaps the most,
Mm-hmm.
but science fiction and literary fiction and dark academia or whatever other genre, whatever it is that is your thing, that's what it does for us.
Yeah.
And I love authors who know what they are doing, who are in control of what they're putting on the page. Because that author, if I can see that control in the first page, I'm sold. I will sit down and read the book, even if I'm sort of going, maybe it's not my thing, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to see where it takes me, because if they know what they're doing, even if it's not entirely for me, there's going to be something I'm going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And that's what I love.
Well, I think that's something too that's really a great way to grow is learning how to find and appreciate things in books that may not be, like you said, your thing, but still being able to say, here's what this book does really well, something that really hooked me, even though, and I'm always more impressed by the books that are outside my wheelhouse of general like favorites that hook me really quickly and are able to draw me into the story, even though it may not be what I generally want to gravitate towards.
So you've just read The Short Timers.
Yes.
Do you think that's a Vietnam War book, or do you think that's a horror novel?
Would it be cheating to say yes?
Erickson had a view of one scene in the novel that completely changed my reading of the novel.
Okay.
So, do people really care about it? It's the basis of Full Metal Jacket. People know the story.
Yeah.
The scene where Joker meets the colonel or the lieutenant. He drives up in the Jeep full of dead bodies.
Ah, yes.
And he is repelled by Joker's peace symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And the officer reads as a vampire, as a literal vampire, repelled by the symbol that Joker believes in, surrounded by these bodies of the young men he has drained of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that, you go, it's not a metaphor, it's a literal vampire in the story. And when Erickson mentioned that to me, I went and reread it and went, yeah, I can see that now. And it changed my perception of the scene, and it changed my sort of where I was placing it in the genre and how I was thinking about it, and then how I was reading some of the other sequences. I was starting to look for more of that kind of horror symbolism built in, and it was a fascinating way to look at the book. But there's a book that's written in very journalistic prose, very transparent, journalistic. You know, people say workman-like, but incredibly evocative.
Very, yeah. Well, and there's a lot of, like, you know, you mentioning that, I think there's a lot of symbols throughout the entire story that would drive it more toward that horror flavor and direction, because I mean, you have the grinning skull and you have there's a lot of those things in it. And I feel like that, having read it for how tiny of a book it is, I love really tiny books that you can just discuss and analyze for hours, because to me that's incredibly powerful that the author was able to do that much in such a short amount of pages.
Matheson's I Am Legend is like that. Although for most of I Am Legend, it really is the ending. The ending of that book is the thing that makes the book. It's one of the very few books hinge on the ending. And Matheson's I Am Legend absolutely hinges. Without that ending, which is one of the reasons why the Will Smith movie kind of whereas the Omega Man and The Last Man on Earth, the other two movie, it's been adapted 3 times. But the book, there's just something about that book. And again, it is so simple, so straightforward. And it's compelling in that. And the ending turns everything on its head. And it's jaw-dropping and that sort of churning in your stomach as you suddenly, whoa. Martin Amos's Time's Arrow is, again, a book that the ending, the revelation at the end, is it makes you rethink things, and it forces you to rethink the situation. And admittedly, part of that is the trick about the reverse
Sure.
narration, or the reverse chronology of the narration. But that trick aside, Martin Amos's Time's Arrow, fascinating book, and again, a very slim volume, not particularly complicated to read, and incredibly powerful, because it's a new way of looking at something monstrous to stop us being blasé about it.
Yeah. So I want to give you a little bit of you mentioned in my last live stream, I'm still kind of percolating on my thoughts about Jekyll and Hyde, but you had mentioned in my chat that you had something to challenge the way, or to give me a new way of thinking about Jekyll and Hyde, which I did want to clarify. I don't see it just as it's a split, whatever. But no, I was curious about that.
One of the things that's, because Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's a very old book. The story goes about when it was written, that he wrote the first draft, and it was more horror-driven, blah, blah, blah. And his wife read it and said, no, you need to write it more as an allegory. And then it diverges as to whether or not he threw it in the fire and the wife tried to save it, or someone threw it in. There's a whole urban myth about the original manuscript. And then he wrote it feverishly over 3 or 4 days. But a lot of it can be read because of the symbolism inherent in it. You can apply very different lenses to it and ascribe the meanings to the different characters. And one of the ways of reading Jekyll and Hyde that I find absolutely fascinating is the queer reading of it. Because if you think, the story begins with Utterson, the lawyer, walking with his cousin in Soho. These two well-to-do, respectable gentlemen walking round Soho. Yes, that part of London. Why would these two respectable gentlemen be walking around Soho? Particularly when it points out they don't like each other's company. But this is the highlight of their week. So why are two well-to-do, respectable gentlemen, the highlight of their week is spending time with each other, even though they don't like each other, where they go on these walks down into Soho? And that's a bit strange. And then they see Hyde. Hyde is walking along, and then Utterson says he trampled a child. So that's how it's described. And the child has run out, and Hyde has walked into them. But he describes it as trampling. And you're like, but why? That would be physically impossible to do. The kid would have bounced off. And then, because this commotion has happened, Utterson looks around, and there's a police officer. It's that gentleman over there. He immediately points the finger at someone else. Why is he doing that? Seems a lot like a very guilty thing to do. They immediately point to someone else, and everyone look at that person, not at me. So it sets up this very strange, from the very beginning, this very strange framing of the story. And then you think about who Jekyll is. Very respectable, very reserved, everything outwardly normal and polite society. And then you think about who Hyde is, who has this secret bachelor pad in Soho that is sensuously decorated, that is sumptuously decorated, that is seductive. And one of the instances we hear about Hyde, and again, from another observer who says, Hyde was walking along the street when this elderly, well-dressed, well-to-do gentleman crosses the road to speak to him. And remember, Hyde is described as being a young, attractive, very virile-looking young man. And this older gentleman, very well-to-do, comes across and says something to Hyde that Hyde takes offense to and punches him and beats him up. And isn't Hyde a rotter? You're like, Hyde was walking along the street doing nothing wrong. And then you think of the time period in which this is written, about this outward respectability, and then the potential secret life that someone is living because they're homosexual. they have their secret apartment in the other part of town where they're not going to run into people who know them, where they have these secret lives, where they get accosted by older gentlemen who are treating them like rent boys. All of that suddenly changes the reading of Jekyll and Hyde into this investigation of the public perception of what was allowed, what was respected, and what you could get away with if people didn't know about it. But it was the secret heart of so many of these gentlemen that they were gay, and they couldn't show it. And then you think about, what happened to Oscar Wilde, and you suddenly see all of these sorts of connections. So it's not about, it's using it as a symbol for the secret dual life that we sometimes lead, where we, for our job, we have to maintain a certain appearance. And then in our private life, you go, well, I'm going to be a completely different person. And so it doesn't have to be that queer lens. It can be any sort of lens like that we apply to it. But I think the queer reading of Jekyll and Hyde is very, very powerful, particularly once you start digging into it. Once you start looking at the incidents and where they occur and who is the one complaining about it and what their perspective is. But it's such a symbol-heavy, allegorical style of writing that you can decide to read it that way rather than a very literal interpretation that this is about a split personality. He didn't write it as being about a split personality.
Right.
He wrote it about having a separate life and trying to keep these two lives separate.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and I think that comes down to when, oftentimes a group of readers or a culture around a certain book, when one, idea starts getting passed around, and that's just kind of, oh, well, that must be, and then everybody kind of gets on that train. And that was where that, for me, that was more because I had so many people who were talking in articles and conversations about how Jekyll and Hyde is this thing. And so going into it, when I was looking at it from that lens, I was like, nope. And I read another fantasy book a couple of years ago where it was the same thing, where there's a certain character was meant to be representative of X disorder. And I went into it with that lens, and it was immediately, I was like, no, but that's becoming, people are just repeating and repeating and repeating that. And it becomes, then that's what people go into the book with, that expectation. So I'm learning myself how to remove that and try to just go into the books with, well, let's see what I can find in it, as opposed to what have I heard? What can I find?
And that is a brilliant point, because I was talking there about a lens that's being applied to Jekyll and Hyde as a different way of reading the story.
Yeah.
And it's, to be honest, it's something that I sometimes take absolutely for granted that people can do. And yet, if I think about it, I was trained to do this. This is part of what studying literature does. It teaches you to place different lenses, to read in different ways. And you forget that it's not natural to everyone. And this is, sometimes I think, learning how to remove lenses is a really valuable skill. Someone says, this book is all about this thing. And so you go into it looking for that. And if you don't see that, then you're going to get disappointed. Or you do see it and go, well, yeah, but like, it's not the best representation. Preconceived notions and these expectations that we project onto a text. Because of that, we are filtering the information from the text, and we are only going to read it in a certain light.
Right.
And one of the most difficult things to do is to step aside from all of that, move all of that stuff away, and do your first read. What is the book telling me? What am I getting from the book? With all of my unconscious and implicit and explicit biases.
Yeah.
But what am I getting from it? Then, at the end, once I've read it and I've thought about it, then I'll see what other people have said and go, right, you don't even necessarily have to reread. You just sort of, in your head, go back through the book, applying the different filter and go, oh, well, that filter emphasizes this interaction. this filter emphasizes this interaction, which raises the priority of that information, the importance of that information, which recontextualizes this. And that's how we do these different readings.
Yeah.
It seems like a magic trick, but it's what we all do.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that I read Malazan outside of a community for the first time. And to be fair, I've only read up to the end of House of Chains. I'm hoping to finish it next year.
We can't be friends anymore. That's it. You're off.
I know it's over. I know, fake fan card. But it was so funny because when I read Dead House Gates through House of Chains, I was so incredibly struck by a specific character arc that goes through those two books. And no spoilers for the name, but you'll probably know who I'm talking about. And I didn't know, because I was in my own space reading it and taking, having my own experience with it. Then coming into the community and realizing that this specific character was highly controversial. And all of a sudden I'm I was so shocked by that. Because I only had my lens and experience that I had read this character from. And I was like, oh, I have something to add to this conversation now because I had my own, experience to add to that, as opposed to, well, I've heard that everyone else says,
I think there has been a change in how so many of us approach reading now. Reading used to be solitary. You got the book, you read the book. And then when you'd read the book, you met up with friends to talk.
Your one other nerd friend. Yeah.
One other, or you went and found an actual university program that allowed you to study this stuff. But
right.
You met up with people to talk about it. Or you had friends that you would email about it because you were no longer living in the same place. But you read the book first. And now there's almost like a performative aspect of reading. This reading in public of doing and read-alongs are great. Do not misunderstand me. I love these communities. I love the communities that build up, encouraging people to read. I wish everyone read more. But a potential aspect of it is this sort of performative aspect of reading of, here's this thing, I must say the thing about it. And therefore, this is now known and it's now a talking point. And then people are going to talk about that talking point. Whereas a lot of time, reading was much more private. And you could think about things, you could wrestle with things. And then when you talk to other people, it was in a private conversation. And, there were fanzines, there were message boards, and, people could debate stuff. But now so much of it is online. So much of it is public discourse. And because they recently did a study, I wish I could remember who did it, but they did a study and they were looking to see how people perceived fictional characters. And apparently, according to this very limited study, the lonelier we are, the more we see fictional characters as real people. But they also found, regardless of how lonely we are, even if we are the happiest people in the world, our favorite characters we see as real people. And suddenly you see why passions can run so hotly about criticism of a fictional character. You go, but it's just a character in a book. But people feel that because they may identify with that character. They may love that character. And those feelings are real. Like they've done this study. They've studied our brains and gone, humans are weird. This person doesn't
Who
exist.
knew?
And that can lead to a lot of animosity. And of course, online discourse does not favor listening. Online discourse favors, you've made your point, now I'm going to make my point. And okay, so you've made your point, I'm going to make my point. You're not even reading the other person. It's, I'm going to read this bit, I'm going to copy and paste it because I'm going to say that you're wrong here, because we don't read, we don't listen. We're waiting for the break in the conversation to say our thing.
Right.
And yeah, it was difficult. The reaction I had the first time I read Dead House Gates to that character she rubbed me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
It was like sandpaper. You're like, oh, and you were going through the whole thing. But I never thought that she was badly written, and I never thought that
Brilliantly
Erickson
written.
was treating the subject without seriousness. And I thought she was very powerfully written. And by the end of the book, he made me like her. And
He does that. It's really annoying.
Yes.
It's
But
not
he
just
made
with
me
her.
like
There's
her.
so many characters I can think of immediately, even in those 4 books that I was like, oh, I can't stand. And by the end, I'm like, wait a second. How come I suddenly care? How did that happen? Where did that happen?
Esselmont made me start to like a character called PATRON.
Wow.
I've never forgiven him for that.
I've never heard a larger compliment to an author's skill about a character than that.
But that's the very first time I read it, and I was blown. I was engaged in the story. I was traumatized by the story. I was affected by the story. And at the end, fascinated and in love with the story. And so when I did the reread with Philip, I realized that my initial irritation, and like I freely admit it, that I was irritated by her. But I looked at it now with new eyes, because now I know what happened. And I was going, how could I ever have seen this any other way? Like, whoa, what was wrong with me? And of course, there's nothing wrong with you, because you react to things, and then you have time to think about it, and then you have time to incorporate that thinking and integrate it into who you are, and you have life experiences that reshape how you think about things. And so rereading that story, I had a very different experience of her character.
Yeah.
And that's the joy of reading books at different points in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even now going back and rereading certain books where I'm now a mother, and that completely changes the lens through which I read, or, having been married longer, or, whatever it is, even now being part of a booktube community does change slightly the way that and I think largely in a good way, but like you said, there's pros and cons to everything. But, being able to watch videos from, like, on your channel has really given me more of an appreciation, and I think broadened the viewpoint on what I will enjoy and how to enjoy that. And I really enjoy watching your videos to just, all right, now it's thinking time with AP. And I love that, because sometimes I don't, I need that, and I want to keep challenging how I'm looking at literature through, I can't always put that hat on, because sometimes my brain's fried and I just need to skim through something. But I think it's important to go back to that and to continue to grow.
But that's like, it goes back to one of the points we made at the beginning. Sometimes you want to read about a fun thing happening, and you don't want to engage your brain. That you want the candy floss narrative that has no substance, but in the moment is giving you all of the things, and you go,
right,
that's brilliant. It's still reading. Now, if that was the only thing that you read, if that was your reading diet, it's not a particularly healthy diet, as anyone who has ever tried to live on candy floss would know. But it's still reading. It's still better than nothing. And sometimes we want that. But there are so many different types of books like there, from different time periods, different cultures, different genres, different authors with all of these different perspectives. So many different types of story that we are never going to experience them all. And so let's just have fun and see what we can find. And don't worry about chasing the next big thing, because the next big thing mightn't even be the thing that you want. But everyone else is having a conversation about it. You're like, just wait for the next one. There's going to be in today's society, there's going to be a next big conversation about 6 minutes later.
Right.
Yeah. Like it used to be, what would they say about that? The sort of half-life of memes, the shelf life of a meme used to be something like 3 months, and then it became 3 weeks, and now it's about 6.5 minutes. That's how long. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but it is.
I mean, even that shrinking of it's
because
wild.
It gets overdone and people overuse it. They jump on one thing, they run it into the ground, they use it to death, and then and now just move on to the next one. And it becomes disposable culture. And I think sometimes that leaks into how we treat books, that we treat them as 100%. Disposable culture, as a disposable commodity. It's you read and you throw it away. And I'm not saying that people can't do that, but I still believe that there should be a range, and that we shouldn't expect all books to be like that, and we shouldn't expect the industry to do that. That the industry, we would hope, would cater to people who want to read a book more than once, who want to read a series and then 10 years time reread it, or read it multiple times. Like, we need that diversity. And I think that enriches writing everywhere.
I agree. And I think that's one of the things that, as I've really started leaning into what a lot of people would consider more, rich, or I hate the word dense, but people use it all the time, or slow burn series or books. I think that because our life is so fast paced and so exhausting all the time, and we have all this information, instant gratification, everything, that those books should be protected at all costs, especially as well, because it gives us an immediate slow down, invest, give it time that I don't think we have a lot of in daily life anymore. So I think that's really, really powerful. Philip, we should go back to the good old days when books were made of vellum and painstakingly handwritten with ink made of berries.
Well, when he was a child. Philip is a 900-year-old vampire. Like, everyone knows this.
I would believe that. Yeah, I would believe that. Malazan is a book series that sticks with you no matter what. That, only having read the 4 books that I've read of the series, it is by far the most influential series I've read. And I can say that without even having finished it. For me personally. Yeah.
Have you been interested or even challenged by the fact that each book is radically different? If you read, any other series, but if you read any other series, quite often there's an expectation about the series that you see certain patterns, you see recurring things. But each of the Malazan books, for the first 4 that you have read, have had slightly different structures, have had different focuses, different themes.
Yeah.
Has that? What do you think about that? Because it's one of the things I love.
I agree with that, because I think each of the books, I can point to things from Gardens all the way to House of Chains, that each book taught me something drastically different about the genre that I was learning to love at the time. And I think it opened my eyes to the way fantasy could be written, or the way that character arcs could look, or even something is like, this would sound really simple, but at the time I was an absolute infant to the genre. The idea that you could have this beautiful, like, poetry at the beginning of your chapters. Like, it's such a simple thing. And I know a lot of other people do it now, but I'd never read that before. I'd never seen that before. And I loved how that just exploded the world building and gave you little moments to pause and enjoy this kind of lyrical poetry before you were put back into the scene with the characters. And each book definitely completely different. I could point to moments in all 4 books that I was like, this taught me something or changed how I view or write books.
Because weird enough, that's one of the things that I value about the Malazan Book of the Fall. And I value about Ian C. Esselmont's novels of the Malazan Empire. Each book is different. That there is variety within that. And every book, because there's so much stuff jammed in there, that there's, even if not everything is firing for the particular thing that I'm interested in that moment, there is always something there that I'm going, you have my absolute, undivided, 100% attention. I am so invested in this.
Mm-hmm.
And on that very first read, when I was reading through out of sheer embarrassment that I hadn't read this man's work, that was the thing that stunned me about each of these books, that it wasn't reading like you could read David Gemmell, and in David Gemmell, once you've read the first 5, you pretty much have read all of them. Some of the details will change, some of the order of things will change, but David Eddings, you read the first 5 David Eddings books, you have read all of David Eddings, because it's the same characters and the same things, and sometimes things get changed around a little bit, but they're basically the same. And one of the things I loved about the Malazan Book of the Fallen when I was reading it was I did not know what was coming next. I could not predict what was going on. And once you've spent a lot of time studying the genre and studying a lot of these things, there are books that you start reading and you know where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can even plot out in your head the sequence and order of events, roughly when they're going to occur, and the consequences of those events. And one time I did that I was 2/3 of the way through a book 1 of a trilogy, and I predicted what was going to happen in books 2 and 3 and the order of the events, and I got 11 of my 12 predictions right.
Wow.
Including the big ending.
Mm-hmm.
That is where being an editor and studying this stuff can ruin your reading.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it meant that they were doing things that very consistently, and it was going to work for an audience, because not everyone is going to do that. But sometimes when you are looking, you're trained to look for patterns. You see the patterns. You see, oh, that's definitely foreshadowing for, right, okay. Malazan was something I could never predict.
Yeah.
Never.
Yep. Well, and that's why I think I've had to have, in terms of what I've read, the most trust in Erikson as a writer of any series I've ever read, because when you have to invest yourself and say, okay, I don't know what's coming, but I'm here for the ride. I'm absolutely here for whatever is coming. I trust that it's going to be incredible. Because sometimes you don't know what's coming and you don't have that reassurance that it's going to be incredible. Yeah, I'm very excited to finish out the series and just have the experience of all 10 books together, and then move on to Malazan Empire and just see how all of, I mean, it's just such a massive undertaking.
Well, it isn't. And see, this is where I have a disconnect, I think, maybe with people who are younger than me. And let's face it, you are younger than me. I'm old. But when we were reading, like, if you were reading these as they were coming out, there was one every year or every other year.
Right.
So there's a big gap between them. And you don't go, well, this is a massive undertaking. You go, no, it's a book. It's literally just a book in front of me.
Yep.
But people now look at it and they go, oh, it's this huge series. You go, no, it's the book in front of you. It's page 1. Start reading. It's going to take, you're going to read the same number of words. You're going to read them at roughly the same pace. People sometimes talk about, oh, this is a really challenging, or like, this is so epic. And there are those aspects to it. But I think we build up these false narratives in our head that are barriers to us actually enjoying things. Because it's just a book. Like, no more, no less. And books are amazing things, and I love them. But that's what it is. It's a book. It's words on a page. That's it. And it's not a massive undertaking, because you read words on a page every single day. If I could, I would read in my sleep, because that would be additional hours of reading instead of, I wish I could read in my sleep, but We read all the time. It is so straightforward. No book is an undertaking because it's the joy we feel as passionate readers. And as soon as we start building up this narrative and becoming apprehensive, we build up psychological blocks. We create these hurdles that we're having to clamber over instead of going, I love this stuff. I cannot wait. You know what? But I can't have too much of this all at once. I'll do this book now. I'll read the next one in 4 months' time. That's what reading is. And we read different books at different times for different effects. But because, again, I think part of this maybe linked to this reading as a group effort. It's we have to have a schedule. We have to do this. We have to read it all in one go. We have to binge it. No, I'll read that one, then I'll read this one now. I might read 2 in one go and then take a break.
Well, and that's why I intentionally avoided jumping onto any Malazan read-alongs, because I was very, I really want to have my own pace and my own experience with finishing this series. It obviously means a lot to me. And to me, when I say massive undertaking, I don't necessarily mean that in a negative sense. It's how many books are it between Cam and Steve? I mean, it's a lot. It's a few. It's a couple.
Yeah, it's more than one.
So it is. I mean, it's a large world and series, multiple series, and so to me, it's a massive undertaking because of the quantity of books within that world. But I see it as something that I'm excited to undertake because I love the content in it.
Look, and that is fantastic. It's just I know some because I've seen people get very apprehensive going. It's
yes,
and you're like.
No I try to talk people into reading Malazan all the time because everybody is. Oh, it's so intimidating. It's so, and I mean,
it's almost like the Malazan books are in the dark corner of the room going, read me. They're not intimidating. They're just books. If someone said like Raymond E. Feist's Rift War, is it now the Rift War cycle is the entire thing? You go, that's like a bajillion books. Oh my God, how many? It starts with a trilogy. Read the trilogy. Read book 1. If you like book 1, read book 2. If you like book 2, read book 3.
Yep.
Don't think about it as, I have to read the... No one is... Read what you want to read. Enjoy what you want to read.
Right.
Find that love, that passion. That's the thing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think... If I only ever, I won't because I want to finish the series because I'm excited about it. But if I only ever read those 4 first books of Malazan, that would be amazing. I've already had an amazing experience with those 4 books. And to me, anything past this is just going to be even more icing on the cake because I already have that experience and I'm not going to lose that. I'm only going to add to it at this point.
And like one of the amazing things about books, it is one of the most cost-effective forms of leisure activity because, for even if it's at $25 for this hardback and you read it for 25 hours, $1 an hour, and then later on you have conversations about it because it's part of that whole thing, and then you reread it so you get another 25 hours out of it, and then you give it to a friend and they get 25 hours out of it. You go, that one book is sustaining a lot of time. All for a very small initial investment. And one of the things that I love that you just said there was you don't need to read the rest of the series. That what you have already read has given you something.
Yeah.
You have already been rewarded for your investment of time and money in reading, that it gave you something useful. People sometimes talk about, like George R. R. Martin, he should finish the other book. You go, did you enjoy the first book? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You got your thing out of them. That's what he owed you. He doesn't owe you the next book. Mm-hmm. You haven't bought it. If you pre-ordered it, then you're owed something. But he doesn't owe you anything. You've already gotten the thing that he owed you, which is he wrote a book, you paid for it, and enjoyed it.
Right.
Would we all like George R. R. Martin's next volume? Of course we would.
Of course.
But he doesn't owe it.
Mhm.
It is not, we are not entitled to it. We may want it, we may desire it. And
Mhm.
those wants and desires are perfectly understandable,
Mhm.
but there is no entitlement
Yeah.
because he's already delivered on the thing that he was delivering, which is he wrote a book, it got published, we bought it, we read it, we loved it, we want more. We're
Mhm.
rapacious in our desire for more.
Yep.
Sorry, I sometimes have a bit of a rant about that one.
No, I totally get it, because I've also read the 5 books that are available for Song of Ice and Fire, and I understand why people so desperately want the closure and the finish. I totally understand that. But also I'm able to just appreciate, yep, I had a journey through those 5 books. I had some amazing time with certain characters that I loved. I learned things from it. And then there are other books to read too. Like, fill up your time while you're waiting with other books.
The way that
There's
we have
more.
the way that we have done for centuries. No, that can't be a simple solution to this issue.
Right. It's like, look at all the other amazing books that are in the world. And if you know how many books, if you go to the Barnes and Noble or Amazon, says, if you like Game of Thrones, here's all the other books. There's not like a shortage of things to read there. So, I mean, that is a good point, Philip. I agree with that too. But to
And
each their
we're
own.
definitely going to get that at some
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
because at some point, or we won't. We'll have just created the ending, our own ending in our heads, like the way that we have done with so many books, where someone had been writing something and unfortunately was unable to finish. You're like, for whatever reason, but the Three Musketeers. It's like a lot of us when we were younger read the Three Musketeers, and then we had the continuing adventures of the Three Musketeers in our head, or we did these things. Whatever happened next? That a lot of that stuff happens. TV shows that get cancelled prematurely, or they get cancelled after one where they're building up a meta narrative, and you go, "We're never going to find out." Well, that sucks. But I enjoyed watching it while it was on. I enjoyed what I got. I don't go, well, that network owes me another season to close everything out. It would be nice.
Right.
I would desire it. It would be wonderful to receive, but I'm not entitled to it.
Right.
How dare they cancel Firefly? I wanted 10 more seasons.
I was just thinking about that. I was like, that's it for me. That's still to this day in my top 3 favorite TV shows of all time. And I'm like, I got 1 season. Absolutely would have loved more. However, I have the benefit of having an amazing season, as opposed to a lot of people I know who had 8 to 12 seasons of their favorite show that just went completely off the rails and turned into a train crash. It was an awesome season. I'll take it.
Well, to be fair, I agree with Derry here. Fox does definitely owe her, because I would not want Derry mad at me.
That's fair. I wouldn't either. I can understand that. And we were also lucky enough to get the film afterwards, which was
and the comic books.
Yep.
And I think there's some novels and novelizations.
Yes, I have the first one actually. Yeah.
There's loads of these things, and people say, "No, but I wanted the TV." Oh, yes, and that's a want.
Yeah, I get it.
Wants are not entitlements.
Right. Yeah, it would be great, but
well, actually, I think now it probably wouldn't, because
so much sure. If they went back now,
you would have to recast everyone, or it's a different time, and. But that has happened to lots of TV shows. It's happened to a lot of series and even film sequences where you go, this was really building it, and then suddenly it went off the rails, and we got to this franchise went on for 3 films too many, or this TV show went on for 4 seasons too many, that they ran out of ideas, it became tired, and there are all sorts of stuff like that happen. Maybe it would have been better if it got cancelled early, and we were always left thinking about what could have been. Because a lot of the time, and this is something like from horror storytelling, what we imagine is almost worse than what they can show on the screen. And you know, it's one of those
Absolutely.
things. It's show little tiny bits of it or glimpses of it because the human imagination is going, that thing's frightening. And then when it comes out of the shadows and we go, that's a guy in a rubber suit.
Right.
But it's amazing. Like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a trilogy now in 5 parts, but also the radio plays, which completely contradict. Because started radio play, then novelization, then back to radio plays, then the TV show, and it's all the same story, but it's all completely different stories. You go, Douglas Adams, mad genius. They're all different forms of the story. They play with it in different ways. They emphasize different things. They play to the strengths of the medium in which they have been released. And those different media do different things. So which is the real Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Right.
And if you love it, if you enjoy it, that's the thing.
Right.
Love things.
I think that's really important because I think oftentimes we can maybe go into things just trying to make them prove us right or that prove that I'm going to like this instead of just going into what can I learn from this or what can I enjoy out of this, which is hard. I mean, it is. I still struggle with that. In some books I go in and I'm like, well, okay.
I think what can be even worse than that, though, is going into things already wanting to hate them.
Yes.
And there's been a rise of a lot of commentary like that.
Yes.
And that has been very disheartening for me because I love story. I love story done well. And you can look at something and go, well, I didn't like how they did that. But you don't go, that's a trash fire. And people, because they don't like something, aren't willing to see the good in it.
Exactly.
And, or willing to admit that there is any good in it. And so it's one of the things that disappoints me a lot about some of the online discourse is that it focuses so heavily on the negative and sensational negativism.
Yes.
That everything is sensationalized. Everything is emotively rendered to the nth degree to stir up outrage about something and to whip up fervor and hatred of something. Like movies coming out and it's the trailer's released and it's this movie is going to suck because of the trailer. You saw the poster and hang on, you already have 6 months of saying this film is going to suck. But what? The film isn't even out yet. There isn't an advanced preview of it. At least wait until you've seen the film.
Right. Well, and I think that goes back to the discussion that, I mean, I intentionally avoid doing rant reviews or things like that on my channel because I'm not being dishonest. I will tell people I enjoyed this, I didn't enjoy this, and here's why. But that's not the community. That's not the kind of community I want to build. I don't want to build a community of people that are just waiting for the next me being angry at something video.
Well, I started doing a series of videos on Star Trek Discovery. And I was going through, analyzing it. But the more I was the more the angrier I got. And it was becoming me ranting. And I stopped doing them because it wasn't healthy for me. It wasn't a healthy way to be looking at the narrative. It clearly wasn't operating and functioning in the way that I wanted or the way that I valued. So I wasn't adding to any conversation about this. It just became ranting and it was unpleasant. So I stopped doing it. The thing was, I carried on watching Discovery. And I think it was towards the end of season 3 and season 4. I really started to enjoy a lot of the episodes. They changed their approach to some of the things that had annoyed me in the earlier episodes and the earlier seasons. They changed the focus. They started accounting for the things that I wanted to see. And I went, this is great. I'm enjoying this now. I was more surprised, I think, than anyone else in the world that I was now enjoying this TV show.
Yeah.
And then Strange New Worlds came on. And it was doing from the outset the things that I wanted. And I'm going, yes. So I really enjoyed it from the get-go. And I would love to start doing videos on that sort of stuff again, except I don't want to end up in a situation where I end up going, no, and into that negative spiral, because it sucks the life and joy out of
Yeah.
everything when
Yep.
you get into that spiral.
Yep.
So even now, if I don't like something, my personal preference is one thing. Professional evaluation is a different thing. And if I'm using it as a teaching tool, well, that's an entirely different thing again. Because they're all different considerations. But I'm not going to tell someone I really like this when I didn't, because that is dishonest.
Right.
But I very rarely tell people what I like.
Yeah, I try really hard to. One of the things I like to do is, after I read a book that I really didn't like and really, rubbed me the wrong way, is I go into the community to see if someone I know has done a video or a thought about it that they really enjoyed it. Because what I like doing is kind of seeing, okay, from someone's perspective who did love this story, what was it about this story? Now, I may still disagree with it, but I want to hear the perspective of the story from the light of somebody who really enjoyed it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to change my mind necessarily, but it opens me to say, oh, okay, so somebody might enjoy this if, or, whatever conclusion you draw from that.
And that, I think, is a brilliant approach, because it's fascinating. We can go, how can anyone like this? This is absolutely terrible. And then we listen to a passionate fan, or someone who's clearly articulated something. You go, right, it's still not my thing, but if that person got that out of it, that's a new way to think about this.
Yeah.
And there are some very, very popular authors out there whose work, I've enjoyed some of it, or I haven't enjoyed it. It's not my thing. But they have incredibly passionate fans who love this stuff. And you go, you know what? I am so happy that author is out there writing the work that you love. That I am happy for. I don't love it. Okay, but who loves every single thing?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And I might dislike it. It should not in any way impact your enjoyment of that thing. Because love the things that you love, embrace them, celebrate them. If we all do that and spent less time, I think, sniping at each other, and well, if you like Malazan, then you shouldn't like that thing. You're like, no,
that's one of the reasons why I love talking about my group of favorite series, because they could not be more different. And I love that. I love that it's like, I have Malazan, I love Malazan, and I love Red Rising. That's one of my other top favorite series. And I adore both of them. They are so incredibly different from each other. And I love that. I love that there's something for every mood that I'm in. I love that I, don't have to like the same thing all the time.
But there was just forgotten the name of the title of it. It's by Bennett R. Coles. It's a space opera, military space opera, and I loved it. I had so much fun reading it.
Yeah,
and then Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, or then looking at Johnny Wirtz's one of the Wars of Light and Shadow, like say Fugitive Prince, or one of the books in the Realms of the Elderlings, or going back to reading one of David Gemmel's books, The Knights of Dark Renown, which is a wonderful play on the Templar story. These are all completely different books. And then I go, yeah, you know what? I'm going to reread Pride and Prejudice because I haven't read Austen in a while, and I love that. I'm going to reread Dracula. I'm not going to reread The Three Musketeers. No. I still think of it fondly. But I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to enjoy it. But there are all of these different books that have different styles, different time periods, different stories. You read them at different times. And loving one thing doesn't mean that you can't love something else that's completely different. And appreciating one thing doesn't mean that you endorse it or you support it. But you can appreciate what an author has done. There are all of these different ways of approaching and engaging with literature. And that should be encouraged, all of the different ways to do it. The one thing that I would hope we have more of is being slightly more civil in how we speak to one another. How can you like that thing? You're terrible because you like that. Why do you like asparagus? Because you like it. It's that thing that you liked, you enjoyed. Do you want me to lie and go, well, I don't enjoy this thing that clearly I enjoyed because, other people don't enjoy it and I want to be part of that crowd? Like, no, I enjoyed it. If I didn't enjoy it, I'd tell you I didn't enjoy it.
Right. And that we can disagree with each other and like different things. And that doesn't mean we have to be enemies immediately.
No, we can't. You're now my enemy. I disagree with you vehemently.
Well, I haven't read the whole Malazan series, so I mean, or Dracula. So this relationship is off to a horrible start.
That makes you like a triple enemy now. Like, you're really dangerous. You're the triple threat enemy.
I mean, am I like more of a nemesis now than Philip Chase? Because he's at least read these things.
Well, the thing is, I really, because of your dramatic training, I think maybe you've positioned yourself to be his understudy. So once I finally defeat him, guess who will be waiting in the wings?
I mean, I can neither confirm nor deny anything to that effect. He's probably not even here to defend himself now. That's okay.
That's okay. He doesn't need defending. He's evil.
But if I'm his understudy, I would feel a compulsion to defend him. So I maybe
implicated
myself. Once again, I can't speak to any future plans here. Do I have, I don't know if I can answer that question, Derry.
Isn't it someone called IROP?
Yes, but Derry just mentioned that her imagination is worse than anything in reality, so I'll just let her imagine my evil alter ego. I don't know that I would want to meet my evil alter ego. That sounds unpleasant.
It's like Star Trek when they go to the mirror world, except it would just be your name backwards. That's your evil alter ego.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, AP, we have been going for almost 2.5 hours, and I feel like we could easily go for 5. So, I mean, I'm very excited by a lot of the topics that we've delved into, and I feel like I'm going to be sending you a lot of, okay, so you said this thing. I want to talk about that more in the next few days. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat about books. And obviously, we're both very passionate about it, and it's always fun to have chats with other people like that.
It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for the conversation and this opportunity to talk to your audience.
Absolutely. And
by all means,
they're all right.
send me a message anytime. And if you ever want to sit and have another chat about any of these, this is my passion. When I think of the number of years of my life that I have dedicated to this study and appreciation and love of literature, you go, it's a bit obsessive, but it is my passion. I always have time for the love of story. Yeah.
Derry, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you in the comments. So anybody who, for whatever reason, has not subscribed to AP's channel, A Critical Dragon, already, please go down in the description box and click that link and subscribe, because I get so much out of his videos. I always love tuning into any of them and being encouraged to think differently and wider than I am when I walk into the room. And thank everybody in the chat and anybody watching the replay. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.